624, and let's take a look at your money report. Americans have been struggling with rising consumer prices for a number of years. But on Wednesday, the Department of Labor reported consumer prices rose another 0.4%, matching the highest monthly increase in 16 months. Inflation also jumped 2.7% to 2.9%, its highest level since July. But why has inflation remained so high after all these years? Financial advisor Mark Gravicheski joining us now live on Zoom to break this down for us. Hope you're staying warm. Good morning, Mark.
Morning to you, Devin. Yeah. After listening to Andrew's weather update, it feels like, if I step outside, I'm going to have to, duct tape a quilt to my head just to stay warm.
Yeah, I keep telling them, doesn't 50 sound good? You know what we had on Friday? We should kind of
Ah,
continue that. So I guess
luxury.
eventually it'll come back. All right. Well, let's get to our first topic. First off, explain to us a bit more about the current state of inflation.
Well, after reaching a 40-year high of 9% in June of 2022, inflation finally began to moderate. 12 months later, June 2023, inflation had declined to 3.1%. Now, consumer prices were still rising, just at a slower pace. But then that downward path of inflation literally hit a brick wall. Inflation has still yet to fall to the Federal Reserve's target rate of just 2%, which is identified by that red dotted line on the graph. The last time inflation was reported at or below 2%, all the way back in February of 2021. But over the past 3 months, inflation has started to, reignite and trend higher again. As you just mentioned, Devin, inflation jumped from 2.7 up to 2.9% last month. So, here we are nearly 4 years later with inflation that's now drifting farther and farther away from that 2% goal.
But why has inflation remained so high for so long?
Well, if you remember, Devin, when inflation first became a problem, kind of early 2021, much of that rationale was about disruptions to supply chains, the labor shortage, both caused by the global pandemic. But look, supply chain issues and the labor shortage have long since ended. And 4 years later, here we are, and inflation is still a significant risk. Instead, Devin, the main driver has been this massive surge in our nation's money supply. Now, in response to the pandemic, the government passed about $6 trillion in stimulus money. And this new money, Devin, was literally created with the stroke of a pen. We've heard about the phrase printing money. Well, that's kind of what happened. And that $6 trillion was literally dumped into the economy. From February 2020 to April of 2022, the nation's money supply increased by 40%. And what did consumers, businesses, state governments, local governments do with that extra $6 trillion? Well, they spent it, and that created a tremendous upward pressure in consumer prices. Now, from that record high level in April 2022 through October of 2023, yes, the money supply did gradually decline. But over the past 16 months, Devin, that money supply has once again started to steadily rise. Currently, there's still 39% more money, floating around the economy than at its pre-pandemic level in February of 2020. So, it's a little surprise that inflation has, one, remained stubbornly high, and two, and has actually started to rise again over the past few months. Look, I said it before, and I will say it again. Flooding the economy with $6 trillion in cash has consequences, and one of those consequences is high inflation.
Was something so many people are talking about, and
Yeah.
it affects all of us. So we know you're going to stay on top of it, and we want to thank you so much for joining us, Mark. And we'll see you next Monday.
Always great to see you again, Devin. And stay warm. Andrew, work on that weather a little bit for us.
Yeah, we'll try to nudge them a little bit. I can't get through them, so maybe you can. Okay. Thank you.